I'm back, and this year I managed to not lose my camera. Yay! Thanks to Anne Galaraloth for filling in for me last week. I hope you all enjoyed her book review. And if you didn't, well, that's your problem. I just recently came from my vacation to Stratford in Ontario, Canada. And those of you who know about Stratford in Ontario, Canada probably already know what I did there, but for those of you who don't, I went and saw shows, because that's what you do when you're in Stratford. I say I, but it was a family trip, so we. Saw 3 shows while up there. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum by Larry Gelbart and Stephen Sondheim. The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. And A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. And I will be reviewing those 3 shows for you today. Now those of you who are in the theater in any way at all might have noticed that those 3 shows have something in common. They're all comedies. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum is a musical, and it kind of invokes the feeling of ancient Greek or Roman comedy. At the same time, it is very slapstick. The performance that we saw had a lot of very well done physical humor. The comedy is very overt, as anybody who's seen an episode of MASH knows, also created by Larry Gelbart. And of course, the sexual innuendo runs rampant, particularly if you're watching a performance of the musical outside of the US, as I was. The Importance of Being Earnest, however, is altogether different. The humor in that one is very, very dry. The Importance of Being Earnest is a farce. And it takes place in Victorian England when people didn't have a sense of humor, and so everything is said very, very seriously, even when they're delivering these completely ridiculous lines. So completely different, but no less funny. In fact, I would actually argue more funny. And then finally, we have a Shakespearean comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream, which takes elements from both. It is both, you know, kind of bawdy and overt at times, but at the same time, it's also satirical and very dry at times. And of course, Midsummer being Shakespeare, you've got the language and the colorful metaphors and the rhyming couplets. And you know what I say, everything's funnier on rhyming couplets. I've actually never said that before now, but whatever. So as you can see, 3 very, very different comedies, and yet they still have that connecting thread. They're all comedies. So they all have certain similarities. They all involve certain characters getting into certain hijinks for whatever reason, usually getting into all sorts of trouble by intermission, usually their own fault. Although in Midsummer it is admittedly the mischief of the fairies that causes most of the trouble. And everything looks rather hopeless for quite a while, and you can't see how they're possibly going to get out of the mess that they've gotten themselves in, and then all of a sudden, at the very end of the show, they pull some random solution out of midair. But not completely out of midair, you know, they dropped hints earlier in the play, but it seems like it was out of midair. Suddenly, everything works out perfectly, it's a happy ending, the end. And of course, with all 3 of them, there are plenty of jokes and things to laugh at all on the way. So I enjoyed all 3 performances. I think I enjoyed Forum least. It's written so over the top that it's easy to go overboard. And it didn't bother me all the time that they were over the top, but there were some moments that I wish they had thrown in just a little bit more subtlety. Ernest was hilarious. Brian Bedford played Lady Bracknell. Yes, it was a dude playing a lady. He was also the director, and it was hilarious, and he did a wonderful job with it. And Midsummer was very interesting. The thing about Shakespearean plays is that everyone is trying to figure out new ways to do them. And with this one, they did Midsummer with kind of a 50s motif. And so as such, the fairies, who are the mischief makers and the rebels, were dressed as rock and roll icons. We actually got to see the premiere performance, so no one had ever seen it done this way before, except for the people involved with the show. So that was my weekend in Stratford. If you've never seen any of those 3 shows, then I implore you to go out and see at least one of them, because they're all wonderful shows. And with that, I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.